Thank you very much, Ms. Rain. I'll start before I offer the call to my colleagues. There's obviously been some quite significant changes at Twitter since the change of ownership, and Twitter is a private sector company and your ownership is a matter for you, and the decisions you make about how you spend your money is a matter for you as well. But I'm interested in the implications of those decisions for your users and therefore for our democracy. So I want to ask in particular about what has happened at the trust and safety teams at Twitter since the change in ownership. How many staff do you have dedicated working on those tasks, particularly in relation to foreign disinformation campaigns?
I'm happy to pick that up. So one of the, contrary to media reporting, when the restructuring was happening, the trust and safety team was affected disproportionately less compared to other teams in the company. You'll have heard our new owner speaking about the importance of content moderation, the importance of preventing manipulation. Indeed, one of the primary motivators of purchasing the company he's spoken about was preventing manipulation. And so we are a significantly smaller company. We have a number of third-party contractors as well as full-time staff. I don't have the exact number of those working on trust and safety. We also still do have our threat disruption team, and that team is the team that leads investigating and disrupting foreign interference in elections and indeed manipulation of the service at large. One of the challenges we have is that distinguishing a foreign bad actor from a domestic bad actor is often quite challenging, and so we take a holistic approach looking for that, and so we continue to suspend millions of accounts for violations of our spam and manipulation policy, even after the purchase of the company.
Could I ask you then to come back on notice to the committee on how many employees are in each of those two teams that you spoke about, and what the change in the size of those teams has been since October last year when the ownership of the company changed?
Sure, we can work with colleagues to try to get you some data on that.
Thank you. Bloomberg has reported that about half of the company's information operations and threat disruptions teams resigned, that some of them might have been replaced, I acknowledge, and at one point there was just 4 US-based employees who were left to stamp out foreign disinformation campaigns on the platform. Is it still the case, or was it ever the case, that there were only 4 US-based employees working on that problem?
I'm not familiar with those numbers and not familiar with that report. Unfortunately, we have seen some media reporting based on inaccurate or incomplete information. But certainly in terms of, again, how we tackle this issue, there are people around the world working on this who are focused on it, not just looking at foreign disinformation, but also looking at domestic manipulation. Certainly in the last US election, for example, domestic manipulation was a far higher source of threat than foreign manipulation. So those teams continue to work across the company. And as you say, we're also looking at new ways of innovating. And so Community Notes is a product we've launched and scaled, now available in Australia. 10 times the number of people using that service this year since the beginning of the year now. So we're also investing in new areas to protect the service. You'll see the changes in verification in Twitter Blue, all designed to increase the cost and the barriers to manipulating Twitter. Yeah, I appreciate the point you made about the difference between domestic or international manipulation of the platform. The mandate and the jurisdiction of this committee is to focus on the foreign interference problem, because we're particularly concerned at the way in which authoritarian states have sought to intervene in our democracy through platforms such as your own. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute reported in March 2022 that Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, China and Venezuela were the most prolific perpetrators from a state-backed point of view, using Twitter to try and deploy information operations targeting both their own domestic audiences but also foreign audiences, including Australia's. Is that still the case? Is that reporting accurate in your view? I don't have up-to-date data. Certainly we do see changes in how some of those countries, obviously Twitter isn't available in several of those countries, they do block the service. But in terms of the nation states that I think you are concerned about, certainly those are the sorts of nation states that continue to pose a threat to public conversation around the world.
Thank you. What is your process for identifying a state-backed information operation? How do you identify it? How do you restrict it and shut it down when you find it?
Well, speaking very broadly, obviously one of the hardest things in this space is attribution. So I think it's very important to reassure you that we don't wait until we can confidently attribute before we take action. So often we're looking at behavior signals. They may be linked to accounts, they may be linked to networks, they may be linked to origin. Obviously, many of these actors are trying to hide and obfuscate where they are, so it's not as simple as saying, show me all the Twitter accounts from one country. We look at content, so certainly in recent weeks, for example, I was in touch with a human rights group and they had identified some concerning activity targeted to them. We took action on that and we don't wait to attribute to take action. So it's looking at networks, it's not just looking at individual accounts, it's looking at the sort of content being generated, maybe hashtags being used, for example, in tweets. And then we do look and seek to take out as much of the network as possible. Those tactics continue to evolve, and I think one of the hardest things of this space is it's so adversarial. A technique that works for us 3 months ago may not work in 3 months, so we have to constantly keep changing our approach.
Twitter has previously made public reports, including about Australia, of state-backed information operations. Do you intend to continue to provide those kind of public reports of the conduct that you're identifying and dealing with?
I think it's fair to say the company is still in a state of transition, so we're reviewing everything from our transparency reporting to how our APIs work. So I think those are the kind of things that we're still looking at, how we're going to continue doing. It was also becoming increasingly challenging for us as a company to make some of those disclosures because some of the impacted states were reacting extremely with hostility towards both our company and our employees. So we were also starting to face challenges around how we could do that work safely and provide informative data to the public.
You also previously had a practice of opening up some elements of your internal data to external researchers so they could investigate these issues, and that has been successful in some instances of identifying state-backed information campaigns. Would you continue to do that?
So actually, we've said publicly that the academic access to data is one of the things we are reviewing. There's a number of legislative changes around the world in this exact area that we're just working through to see how they're going to do. I think one of the biggest changes is the notion of having researchers who are accredited by governments in some cases or public institutions as a form of vetting to actually protect the data itself from bad actors. And so it's something that we're certainly open to, and we're just working through these changes now.
Okay. Twitter was previously a leader in identifying state-affiliated media on the platform, people who have an affiliation, financial or otherwise, with state-backed media in China or Russia, for example, like Xinhua or RT. But it appears that no longer occurs on the platform. What was the reason for this change in policy?
Well, you'll have seen that we've actually made a number of changes around the verification and labelling space. So historically, Twitter had one verification badge that was the white tick in the blue circle, and that was the only means of giving people context about accounts. So we had started to introduce media labels, but in that space had actually hit a number of challenges because there are a small number of outlets, some of which you touched on, which appear straightforward. As soon as you get into the broader media ecosystem, there is no agreed upon list of the which entities should receive labels. Some were litigating over those decisions. And so this is something where we thought we should step back, reevaluate what's the best way to give people context. It's why you've seen us launch Grey, which is a specific badge for government accounts now. It's why you've seen us revisit our verified organizations. So actually allowing organizations to self-identify their accounts on the platform. And it's also why we've switched verification to a subscription model, again, raising the cost of manipulation on the service. At the same time, we are significantly scaling the use of community notes, which is a sort of an innovative product where we allow people on Twitter to add context to other tweets. Those tweets can be added to any account, including advertisers, political leaders, and prominent influencers. And by looking at the people who are adding that data, we're already seeing a significant impact, up to 35% reduction in the sharing of those accounts based on context added by other users. So fair to say this is an area where we are actively looking at effective ways to interfere.
Yeah, I do appreciate it's not a straightforward challenge, that it is complex to assess. But surely at least some attempt at labelling this is better than none, because right now on the platform there are people who are paid for by authoritarian states to spread propaganda in Western democracies who are not being labelled. And unless you're an expert in the Chinese Party state, or unless you're an expert in Russian information operations, it's not going to be obvious to you as a user of the platform that that's the case. And so we now have the very real risk that those accounts are not being transparently viewed by your own users. So surely you can at least go back to what you were doing, which is labelling those people that are clearly affiliated, clearly with authoritarian states. There was no dispute about that, surely.
Well, there were challenges around that. For example, the funding models used by some of these regimes are quite opaque, and indeed where to draw the line. So even in the countries that you've mentioned, where on paper it may look like this is a simple process, there was a huge amount of complexity and risk in there. So I think that's why, thinking again about how we give people context, one of the great things about community notes is it can be posted to any tweet. So actually, if the kind of tweet that you're mentioning is being shared, is being distributed and discussed, people are adding context to those tweets, and it's not just limited to the funding or the editorial alignment of the poster, but it's also context on the content itself. And actually, I think the content of the tweet is often more important than the author that posted it.
I mean, I partly agree, I partly disagree. I'm an active user of your platform. I see a lot of content from these accounts. Sometimes there are community notes to attach to them, and sometimes they are helpful, but often there is no information attached to them at all. And some of their content does go viral. I mean, I understand it was previously the policy of Twitter to not amplify these accounts. You allowed them to be on the platform, but you didn't allow them effectively to go viral with the algorithm. Am I right in understanding that that restriction has been removed on these accounts? So, you know, an Iranian official who previously wouldn't have been able to kind of go viral on the platform now can?
So we've made a number of changes to how the product actually works in terms of the algorithm. You may have seen the For You tab and the Following tab. The Following tab is reverse chronological, no amplification. So actually part of this is also, it reflects a broader commitment at the company to give people more choice and control over the content they're seeing. So in some cases, depending on the actions we take, accounts will have their amplification limited. But again, that's looking much more at policy violations rather than the attribution of the account itself. So
you have made a policy choice to allow amplification of government officials associated with authoritarian regimes that previously you didn't allow?
Well, in terms of again, there was a distinction between state media and government representatives.
I wasn't even talking about state media at all here, just like the Ayatollah Khomeini, who now goes viral on the platform, who didn't previously.
I can check that. My understanding was that the policy that we had in place was limited to media, and actually we hadn't ever restricted the amplification of public figures, but I can check that for you.
It was my understanding that you did restrict it, in particular in relation to Iran, but others as well.
We'll double check that for you, because I want to make sure we're speaking correctly on that.
Okay. All right. Just quickly before I offer the call to other colleagues, one of the witnesses before the inquiry, Ms Vicky Xu, has become a regular target of a transnational repression campaign by the Chinese Communist Party, including on your platform, but also on other platforms, and I've raised it with them as well. There are many coordinated inauthentic accounts that are created to harass her because of her research about human rights abuses in Xinjiang and other work. Are you still on top of issues like this and making sure that content doesn't revive again on the platform?
I'm not familiar with the specific case, and so certainly happy to follow up, and Kathleen may have been in contact as well. But we certainly do still work with human rights groups to escalate and investigate these exact kind of cases. I'd say every few days we're having those kind of conversations. So if that one hasn't come across the team's desk yet, I'll make sure it's identified and prioritised after this.
There are other human rights groups like Safeguard Defenders, which have had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of fake accounts created with the same or similar name and using their similar logo, which appears to be trying to prevent people from easily finding their content on your platform. And this seems to be a persistent and recurring problem. Are you confident you're on top of this?
Well, I think, as you said, one of the challenges here is that the adversaries are well-resourced and also highly evasive in their techniques. So one of the reasons actually for launching Twitter Blue subscription was specifically to make it harder for these kind of swarming attacks to have an impact on the service. And so if we're not catching them, we will look back at that. But I know that there are a number of product changes we are making designed specifically to make it harder and more expensive to try and manipulate Twitter, which hopefully over time will make it harder for these kind of campaigns to bear an impact on the service.
But a willingness to pay for a Twitter Blue subscription is not a very good litmus test for whether the content is verifiable or reliable, is it? I mean, there are many people who are on the platform whose content is verifiable and legitimate who, for whatever reason, are not willing to pay. And there are many people who are willing to pay whose content is, frankly, pretty dubious. It's not a very useful division between good content and bad content on the platform, is it?
So I'd see it less in that light and more of if you are a bad actor who's trying to create a large number of fake accounts. Twitter Blue is intended to raise the cost of that activity. And when you're talking about 100,000 AI-generated accounts, if you can raise the cost by a small amount, it has a significant impact on the bad actor. So Twitter Blue isn't just about to your point, kind of the people using the service in a healthy manner. It's also about raising the cost of bad actors and raising the cost of manipulation.
Okay. All right, I'll give the call to other committee members, and if there's time, I might ask some more questions at the end. Deputy Chair, Senator Walsh.